The new education policy, in my view, has five most important reform ideas. And these five ideas could actually change how education would happen in India moving forward. The first, I think, most important one, which defines completely new architecture for the education system and delivery of education in the country, is the separation of functions or separation of powers. So far, one single department of education used to perform the function of policy making, function of as a regulator, as a financier, also as a service provider, meaning running government schools and colleges. All of those functions are performed by one single department with one single secretary in the department. No one department, no one person can perform all of these functions well. It was very critical to separate those functions out, create independent agencies as much as possible to perform each of those roles. And this is very similar to what we have done in telecom and also in financial markets. So this separation of functions is, I think, the most important and most far-reaching reform in the NEP 2020. Once we build these institutions, of course, currently it is all on paper. We need to figure out how to build institutions on the ground, build the capacity of the institutions to actually execute the function that they are now responsible for. So all of that detailed work, of course, remains. But this change in the law, the change in the policy, would have dramatic positive impact on the education in the country. So just quickly give you how this separation is going to work. So at the state level, there's a Department of Education, which is going to be a policy-making body. The Directorate of Education would become the service delivery body, meaning in charge of running and maintaining government schools. Then we have State School Standards Authority, which is going to be in charge of the assessment, setting the standards of assessment that the schools and as well as the state board would have to meet. So that would be independent body looking at the performance of the government and private schools. So that is at the state level. Then we also have at the national level, a National Assessment Center for School Education. And that center would also have the state counterparts, and they are going to be able to then perform a national overview of the system as a whole. So that is, I think, a far-reaching reform of the separation of functions within the education. Actually, very similar to we have three branches of government, right? The separation of power, which is very easily understood in between the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary. Similarly, same principle in a sense has to apply to each of the ministries or each of the domains of the focus areas of the government. Education obviously being the primary area. Same is to happen in health and many other sectors moving forward. The second most important reform is the reduced focus on inputs, infrastructure, and physical buildings and all of those things, right? Which has been the hallmark of RTE, Right to Education Act. So taking focus away from those inputs and infrastructure and bringing it towards the outcomes and learning levels. So that, I think, is one of the most also far-reaching reform in the NEP 2020. The third important reform in the NEP 2020 is that it establishes a level playing field between the private schools and colleges and the government schools and colleges. Right? So far, in theory, they were all supposed to be regulated independently by the education officers or the department and the ministry. But obviously, in practice, the government institutions, schools and colleges got a very different treatment, very lenient treatment when it came to enforcing standards than what happened to the private schools. So now, in this policy, there's a level playing field between government and private schools, and of course, higher education institutions. And that is largely also a result of the separation of functions. When you're independent regulatory body and the standard assessment body, then that body would apply the same standards and same regulation to both private schools and government schools. And that, I think, level playing field is very important so that the private sector can contribute. I think they are contributing a lot to the nation building in the form of education. Now they can do more openly and I think more effectively the function they perform in ensuring that we have 21st century educated citizenry. Fourth, I think important change, which is building on the previous work that has been done by the government. And that is, of course, establishing a separate body at the central level, the National Assessment Center for School Education, which would then run the national achievement surveys and as well as help the state governments to run the state achievement surveys. These are the two surveys which will be done regularly for private schools and government schools, right? And we would have basically a health checkup every year to tell us how the system is performing as a whole and where are the challenges that we need to focus on. Right? It's a very important part of a feedback loop that we need to know what's working well and what's not working on a regular basis through independent assessment by the center and the state government. The last fifth and the last reform that I think is most significant is the opening of the sector to alternative models of education. It very explicitly eschews the idea that we should have one single monolithic model run by the state or approved by the state. Right? It allows for alternative models of education. It has given new lease of life to NIOS, the National Institute for Open Schooling. They're also advised to expand that domain. They're asked to help create similar agencies at the state level. And by NIOS, we would be able to then have separate routes of education. So I can study at home until grade, say, 5 or 8, take the NIOS exam, which is available to me. And then, depending on the performance of the exam, I can join the mainstream, so-called mainstream schooling. And same thing can happen, of course, at the class 12. Take the NIOS board exam at class 12 and then join a college on my own terms. I think that is a really empowering reform that will open a lot of different ways of achieving our larger goal, which is to educate our children. So I would say these are the 5 most important reforms. There are many other ideas in the policy which are worth discussing. But in my view, and the work that Center for Civil Society has done over so many years, right, and the ideas that we have been championing are the ideas that are central to what we see in the NEP 2020.